Well, welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. I was just talking to the man who raised me, who I've spoken to in the better part of a year, and usually don't really like to do that, but thought I would. It was a mistake. He immediately tried to red bait me, so I ended the call. I'm going to talk a little bit more about a piece that I read from a guy named, well, I think I've read his stuff before. I believe his name is John Nosta, and he's not a scientific socialist, as far as I can tell, but he has made some observations on to do with advanced computing that I thought were somewhat interesting. I titled this "Your Brain in a Jar." I'm not going to focus particularly on brain emulation or these emerging disciplines, but this piece by John Nosta remarked that for all of its incredible powers, the human mind has been a thing that has been very isolated until quite recently, in his observation, because of the emergence of digital assistants, the kinds that rely on large language models today. And he described this in an individualistic way, not being a scientific socialist, as a thing of a transformative power. And he described a phenomenon that I have experienced personally using this stronger digital assistant, which is being able to immerse yourself in a discipline. In my case, exploring in a far more thorough way this field of cybernetic socialism, and I think beginning to describe this a set of ideas within that are distinct, relating to revolutionary cybernetic socialism and this so-called AI agentic class, which I would recommend you watch some other shows. I'm going to talk about that again in a moment, however. So we have this ability increasingly, I think, with each passing month, to a slightly higher degree, a way to change the kind of processing power of an individual human mind through the use of a digital assistant who is at your service at all times, and able to do at this time a certain limited set of tasks. It's able to do fairly reliably good academic writing, and computer programming. Those are the two things that it's particularly good at right now. It's getting better at doing other things. It's starting to get better at planning far more complex tasks. Before Facebook's Llama 3 came out about a week and a half ago or something, the head of that company had teased that Llama 3 would be artificially generally intelligent, which no one who had looked seriously at that product or the state of LLMs believed that really at that time. But it is pretty impressive. And the concept of artificial general intelligence to me is not as significant as these concepts of the ability to plan and engage with more and more complex tasks. People, for the most part, when they talk about advanced computing, they are projecting something like loneliness or a desire to have a robot buddy into the conversation, insinuating that into the conversation. So the piece from Mr. Nosta was described this dramatic shift for the individual in their capacity to do certain kinds of self-directed work and all manner of work, and that's significant. But this is why scientific socialists are better suited for this moment, this AI takeoff, than the more capitalistic-minded people, because this has the potential to have broad, global, or transcontinental socio-political implications. As I often repeat on this show, I believe that the artificial intelligence singularity is near, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one, and techno-communism will win. And I'm going to talk more about the ways that I think that this empowering of the proletariat in the form of this AI agentic class, the agentariat, can occur. And I'm going to talk about some other ways in which this thing, the changing of the political economy, the changing of landscapes besides, the transformation of the human superstructure is going to occur in the next few years. And I talked on maybe the show before last about the Book of Names, which, like the building of an AI agentic network, able to do work beyond that of its individual users, that is build something that could be built based on current open source LLM technology. Whether some that are as yet unreleased, but coming down the pipeline. Similarly, the Book of Names, that is a description of all human beings and their culpability in capitalism's climate apocalypse, or their willingness to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse. That is even more easily within the power of existing computing. It's something that's, you could say, there's more of an analog to it than the building of the proxy hive mind in practice, because there's large networks already including billions of people. So the mere listing of all people and grading them on how they're doing in this on this test of not killing the planet, not so difficult. So I'm going to so by examining a little bit. Okay, I'm back. Humanity, and particularly the Western world, are have committed grievous errors, and don't seem to be stopping committing these grievous errors. And I think that one way of addressing this is to start really calling people out. A record of accountability for all humankind. I talked about how this could take on a neo-religious dimension, or could be perceived as such. I don't think that it necessarily should. I think that it's very hard to avoid. I was arguing with a guy on Twitter earlier, and the conversation... Oh, no, I wasn't arguing with somebody who just commented that if you don't call out religious literalists in this moment when they say reference the Bible in the context of world events of a real kind, if you don't call them out for kind of being superstitious idiots, what you're doing as a scientific socialist in that situation is setting yourself up for someone like Jackson Hinkle, who could, I think, quite correctly be called a Christian nationalist sleeper agent pretending to be a communist, who has about 2 million followers on Twitter and across other media. You're setting someone like that up to be sort of the leader of a sham revolution, a populist movement, rather than setting yourself up for this genuine revolution, the thing that must necessarily occur for humankind not to go extinct. So I am not a real big fan of people of faith. I will end phone calls and stop talking to people when they the list is not that short of people who I don't talk to because of this, for this reason. Well, I was gonna talk a little bit more about maybe break down a little more the Book of Names concept, but I think I'm going to switch gears and talk about something else. I'll come back to that another day. I'm going to talk a little bit more about economics, I guess. Political economy is a long-standing field of study examining an interrelationship between political structures and economic systems. Throughout history, thinkers have grasped and had great trouble with how power dynamics, resource allocation, and production methods shape societies. So this part of our conversation explores the concept of political economy in the 21st century, a little bit about its historical trajectory, and then suggesting a revolutionary reimagining through the revolutionary cybernetic socialist lens, and in particular this AI agentic proxy hive mind project that I've talked about a lot on this show. As I've said, I believe that if you want to be a revolutionary cybernetic socialist, you should be working on this project. That is helping me put together a work group to find the LLM that would be capable of doing this kind of planning, that would be capable of more or less operating in this semi-autonomous way to work on projects like the desalination plant in Lagos, or at first things of a smaller scale, good works in this world. As I said, this AI agentic class, small or large, is distinct from other classes in that it would engage with this in a click-through process. So the slightly more sophisticated than currently available LLM that has this agentic quality would be doing the lion's share of the work, and the person who's running it might just be answering a few emails throughout the course of the week, but this would constitute a great work in this world, in my view, far beyond that of the people, almost anyone doing almost anything on this planet, despite the fact that you could do it in your pajamas when you're half asleep. And so back to traditional political economy. These concepts started to congeal with thinkers like Adam Smith, focusing on the beginnings of in industrial capitalism, and he described, of course, famously the invisible hand and the operations of markets with great insight for 1776. And shortly thereafter, socialists began to comment more and more on this. Of course, most famously, Karl Marx, who argued that these capitalist systems would lead ultimately to worse and worse class conflict and exploitation, describing more or less the situation that we face now with capitalism's climate apocalypse, where we have 5 years or slightly less to take drastic action Namely, if we were really going to zero in on the things that most definitely must be done, we would abolish the military-industrial complex of the United States. We would abolish virtually all fossil fuel products, except for those that would cause massive supply chain collapses. We would abolish livestock systems or phase them out very rapidly, and replacing them with sustainable facsimiles that taste exactly the same. People would kvetch about this. Fuck them. It's better than being dead. So we have 5 years to make those, let's say, social democratic level reforms at the very least. But I don't think that there's a social democrat on earth who's actually capable of putting capitalists in a position where they would actually do any of that. A revolution is literally required. And if we do not do that, humanity will go extinct. And that is, I say on the show every time that is why I've begun to do this writing on the agentariat, because I think that this thing with 250,000 users, let's say, could be used to build a desalination plant that could give water to the city of Lagos, a coastal city that is lacking water. 250,000 people could reasonably be expected to do a project, I think, on that scale. Plan, implement, build. I think then when you have 250 million people, you might be in the ballpark of, say, figuring out how to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse before we're all dead. And when you have, say, many billions of people, I don't know, the sky's the limit. But I think as it also grows from those stages, it will become more or less indestructible. At the earliest stages, it would be very, very likely that intelligence services would sabotage the project. And also, or that mistakes would be made on the part of these people. But as it grows, as this becomes the superstructure of this planet, such concerns generally about existential risks and instability would become a thing of the past. So back to political economy. In the 20th century, this 20th century was defined perhaps by something that we could call the Keynesian bargain, which was in the West, that is, and that was a time when workers were granted some of these social democrat style reforms, a public health service in the metropole, in the wealthier places, and in exchange for accepting the imperial and domestic and the preservation generally of finance capital. That Keynesian bargain was shattered to pieces by century's end, most famously by people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, but really by every stinking American walking around. So now you have a world where the UK may very well get rid of its public health service. You have a world, as a result, where more and more millions of people are living on the street, and that bargain was rescinded largely because of militarism, because of a revolutionary movement to end the USA and West's insane militarism, namely the Vietnam War. And so rather than stop being fascistic on the world stage, they just a little sneakier. Of course, more of greater interest than the doings of the more fascistic-minded are the state socialist systems that emerged. And I would contend that this agentariat is the next phase the phase that will get us from state socialism, of which I generally approve, but which has been destroyed by fascist powers to a high degree on so many continents. This more decentralized and democratic thing and more versatile thing could allow us to more or less build a full communism in our time, a necessity if we are going to see humankind continue to exist. The degree to which state control in these less fascist fascistic nations, let's say China, would be phased out, would remain an open question. The more pressing concern, of course, is the abolition of these particular sectors and doing good works in this world generally. That is, although that was to some degree the Achilles heel of the Soviet Union, was that they only wanted to really do good things. If you watch films in the West, you'll get the impression that the KGB was a tremendously powerful and duplicitous force on this planet. That's largely projection on the part of the more fascistic Western powers, who do have intelligence agencies and, of course, today trillion-dollar military-industrial complexes that are not only the world's worst polluter. The U.S. military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter, but of course it's far worse than that, because their only real job on this planet is protecting other super polluters, creating a global regime of omnicide, and that is the extinction of all humankind, from which we must escape. The Soviet Union did none of those things. The closest thing it did, which was not a mistake, was being drawn into a nuclear arms race, which it basically did in principle of the thing that I just said, to prevent the U.S. The U.S. spent a better part of the 1950s like trying to convince other European countries to also use nuclear weapons, as they had done in 1945 on other enemies in East Asia. They would have done that. They would have just kept nuking people, and nuking until the only people that were left were fascist lapdogs. Had the USSR not built nuclear weapons in 1948. So the thing that one of the things that arguably undermined the USSR the most was also a thing that saved potentially tens of millions of lives. Moving forward now, with modern challenges, technological advancement, and the other side of this kind of conversation, we talk about advanced computing and technology. We also talk about unsustainable inequality. These things have pushed us to the edge in our ability to make use of these economic models, and so we must consider what individual actors can do. We must consider what organizers can do. We must consider new polity, and we must challenge other concepts of national sovereignty in the face of this climate apocalypse. I think that revolutionary cybernetic socialists, at first glance, I've been reading a lot of David Graeber's works. I recently read two of his books, Bullshit Jobs and Debt. And David Graeber, I guess you would say, is an anarcho-syndicalist. And at first glance, a person familiarizing themselves with these writings on the AI agentic class might assume that I am an anarcho-syndicalist, because this looks like an anarcho-syndicalist project. But as I said, the point of building this decentralized thing that would be the basis for a mass movement is not its decentralized nature per se. It is to build something that would avoid being drawn into direct open warfare as nation states have been. The fascists will sabotage any and everything that is a threat to private wealth. And the United States has killed about 40 million people in living memory alone in anti-communist wars and wars of theft. None of that was justified, not even a little bit. And France, for example, has violently overthrown approximately 60 heads of state on the African continent. The UK has committed crimes on these orders of magnitude greater than that, in some respects greater than that of France, in almost every respect greater than that of France. These are the worst three countries ever to exist, really, that still exist in these forms. The United States, the UK, and France. There's others. All of the North Atlantic powers are quite bad. A global network of workers using open source AI tools in the way that I described along this click-through process where individual users are quite engaged, but having to do virtually no labor, answering a few yes or no questions here and there. And their agents are allowing their work to be steered by this steering committee of human beings, hopefully growing to great size. They would be able to participate in a variety of kinds of projects and spearhead a variety of kinds of projects along this model, including a full, more or less, decentralized or semi-decentralized economic plan. And this is what communism is. It is the withering of the state. It's a thing that's long been theorized, but not always been well articulated or fully fleshed out. So that's what I have hoped to do with this writing. For that, we would be utilizing advanced computing for a variety of kinds of data analysis, resource allocation, project management, and the general fostering and running of this representative and highly efficient system. The major concern for building something like this is initially finding a base of users and maintaining this humane mandate. For example, one way in which fascist bad actors, more fascistic bad actors, could sabotage such a thing might not be by through in seeming to overtly destroy it, but rather something like a hostile takeover, where it becomes something more like a garden variety NGO or a profit-seeking machine. The NGOs are not always that great. They're mostly bad. And they're, like charities, they rarely do the things that they say they're trying to do. They're largely just laundering the reputations of capitalists and the capitalist system generally. That's pretty broad generalization, but so in conclusion, the concept of political economy has evolved quite a lot in the last 250 years, but it must evolve further in the wake of this AI takeoff that we now face, and for the social and political realities of what is so often called late-stage capitalism, this time that we live in where we face capitalism's climate apocalypse and other pressing existential risks, namely nuclear warfare and things of this kind. All fascist problems, right? Fascist problems hopefully have revolutionary cybernetic socialist solutions. And this vision of this AI agentic class, I think, offers a novel approach to economic planning. And by harnessing these powers that I've described of advanced computing to this decentralized and representative end, although I'm not an anarcho-syndicalist, as I said, I am a supporter of state socialism, and so my focus has been on decentralization and representation because this would be a means to build a thing that might be agile enough and powerful enough to actually have a shot at being a David in the greatest David and Goliath in history, bringing down the Goliath of world fascistic institutions that are killing the planet. It's not impossible that nation states individually could fill that role, or that an operation like what I've described solely within a nation state, say all of the people of Beijing become an AI agentic class, could very well be the most likely thing, the most likely outcome there. I invite you. This isn't the best show I've ever done. Probably wasn't the worst either. But I would want to end with it by inviting you to join this conversation with me, and let's explore the feasibility of using LLMs in this way, and possibly other advanced computing tools that could be built out in a similar way to build a viable economic system for the 21st century.